I've entitled my talk for today with a question that has its roots in some of Jesus' teaching. My title is this: Are the rich happy? Now, in this extended reflection on the Beatitudes with which Jesus began his Sermon on the Mount, we look today at the first of those Beatitudes. Following a formula we see through 8 statements of blessing or happiness, as they're sometimes referred to. The first Beatitude simply says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." If the poor in spirit are blessed, was Jesus saying that it's wrong to desire to be rich? It would be fun to be able to put up a visual display of the images that drift through each person's mind as they consider that question. Those images would reveal the trappings of what we associate with wealth. My suspicion is that we assume the correct answer to the question of desiring wealth to be that it's wrong to want to be rich, and we regret that we are not noble enough to want to be poor, or at least to be willing to be poor. Before you get too uncomfortable and decide that you don't want to listen to the rest of this talk, let me put you at ease by telling you that not only is it a natural human desire to be rich, but that the desire to be rich is actually God-given. The very promise in this beatitude to give the kingdom of heaven is a promise of bestowing riches, because a kingdom is the ultimate symbol of extreme wealth. So, if you thought I was going to put you on a guilt trip over your hidden desire of wanting to be rich, you can rest at ease knowing that the desire for richness is one that God endorses. Even the frugal Apostle Paul used wealth language to describe God's blessings when he wrote, "That you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance." That's in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18. Although it's true that the desire to be rich is God-given, how we define those riches might be a problem. Defining wealth is always tricky because wealth is a matter of perception, and what feels like richness to some doesn't to others. I have a friend from Africa who grew up thinking that his family was very rich. Compared to other families in his community, they were rich and were looked upon as being rich. That perception of wealth lasted until he made his way first to Europe and then to North America. What had felt like great wealth in his home community amounted to much less when he got away from home. I knew what he meant, but from the opposite perspective. Faith, my wife, and I went to Mexico thinking that we were poor missionaries, only to discover that we were viewed as being fabulously rich. No wonder. We drove a new vehicle, and we lived in a nice neighborhood. All of this leads us to understand that the big issue surrounding wealth is the currency with which we measure it. If we are limited to measuring wealth by the dollar value we assign to it, we're going to have a hard time understanding Jesus' discussion on richness. We can all agree that the most valuable things in life can't be measured in economic terms. The great Christmas classic movie, It's a Wonderful Life, explores the whole dynamic of how we assign currency to wealth. It's a Wonderful Life tells the story of 38-year-old George Bailey, who was about to throw himself off a bridge in his hometown of Bedford Falls on Christmas Eve, being convinced that his life was a failure. He lived with his wife and children in a drafty old house. He had just wrecked the family's old car, and his drunk uncle had lost a large bank deposit, meaning that his family's savings and loan company was doomed to bankruptcy. George knew that a group of bank examiners was about to show up and he might go to jail. Rescued from despair by an unlikely-looking angel who gave George a glimpse of what life in Bedford Falls would have been like had he never lived, George returned home just in time to have all the people whom he had helped over the years come by to pitch in and rescue him from financial ruin. In the climactic moment of the story, George's high-flying brother, who had just returned home, toasted George with the words, "To my big brother George, the richest man in town." George finally got it. Because George had measured his wealth with the wrong currency, he had mistakenly concluded he was poor. The currency of George's wealth turned out not to be money, but to be all the people he had helped through the years. In contrast to George, miserable Mr. Potter, the man who literally had the most money in town, he was in reality impoverished. So, when Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," what was the currency for wealth that Jesus was using? Being poor in spirit sounds more like a problem of despairingly low self-esteem rather than an attitude associated with wealth. Besides, it doesn't fit with the rest of Jesus' teaching to promote people for groveling in self-pity. After all, Jesus went around picking people up, not putting them down. Jesus' words make sense when we consider that Jesus consistently challenged people to make an accurate self-assessment. For instance, he called some of his detractors whitewashed tombs. That's in Matthew 23. Because who they were on the inside did not measure up at all with the image that they projected. On another occasion in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 9, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill." And he went on to say, "For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Without an accurate self-assessment, people sense no need for God in their lives, and as a result, they miss out on connecting with God. The people who were enough aware to be able to see the poverty of their own character flocked to Jesus wherever he went because they encountered one who lifted them out of their despair, and the resulting connection made their lives rich. So when Jesus stated that the poor in spirit were blessed, he was saying that the true currency of our wealth is our connections, first to God and then to people. It sounds easy, but it's not. Like Jesus' detractors who were really whitewashed tombs that would never see their need for a doctor, the human heart is inclined toward denial of our personal needs, We simply are not adept at allowing unflattering rays of light to turn inward so that we see ourselves as others see us. There is a common refrain we hear when people are exposed in a compromised situation. When they are caught, say, in a violent confrontation, or in an immoral act, or engaging in economic dishonesty, people will defend themselves by saying, "That's not who I really am." Maybe you've claimed that defense or some version of it yourself. I'm sure I have. We're inevitably tempted to claim that we are good people who just happen to get caught at an inopportune moment. Unfortunately, when we use the defense of claiming, "That's not who I really am," we've become deserving of being called whitewashed tombs. Most importantly, when we claim to be what we're not, we've robbed ourselves of the opportunity of receiving the riches of the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he was looking for people to be willing to look inward and who would, instead of saying, "That's not who I really am," be willing to confess, "Yep, that's who I really am." It's truly painful for us to acknowledge the depths of our own depravity, but it's the beginning of experiencing a rich life that has undergone the preparation to receive the connections of the kingdom of heaven. What we should not miss is that having an accurate self-assessment cuts both ways. Having an accurate self-assessment means opening our eyes to our inadequacies, but it also means not being content to wallow in a pit of false, low self-esteem. Moses, for example, is remembered as being a model of excellent leadership, but that's not the direction his earlier life was headed. Early in his life, Moses looked like he fell well short of the qualifications to become the great leader that we now know him to be. After having fled from Egypt to Midian with a death sentence on his head for having murdered an Egyptian, Moses appeared content to live out his life as a lowly sheep herder. Even when God spoke to him from the burning bush, declaring that he was going to use Moses to lead his people out of slavery in Egypt, Moses resisted by claiming inadequacy. That was not the kind of poor in spirit Jesus was talking about. Moses appeared content with where he was in life, and he neither aspired to nor saw himself capable of attaining anything more in life. No matter how spectacularly God presented his case, Moses kept declaring his own shortcomings. Even after God enabled Moses to perform miracles like turning a stick into a snake and having his hand become leprous and then healed, Moses proclaimed his inadequacy. Eventually, God became angry when Moses pleaded an inability to speak eloquently, and God declared that his brother Aaron could speak on Moses' behalf. There is a common link between refusing to acknowledge our inadequacies on the one hand and withholding our potential on the other. Both deny us the freedom to embrace the richness of the connections the kingdom of heaven offers. Those who claim to be better than they are miss out on the restoration God offers, and those who falsely pretend to have nothing to offer miss out on the contributions they have the potential to make. So, are the rich happy? The quick answer is yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the rich are happy. Like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, we are not as happy as we might be because we may have misidentified the proper currency of wealth. The wealth of the kingdom of heaven will always be about connections. The poor in spirit are the ones whose personal assessment leads them to recognize their need for connections. Without an accurate assessment of our own inadequacies, along with an honest offering of our abilities, we will miss out on the wealth of connections God offers us within the kingdom of heaven. Here are a few questions to consider to take away. By what currency do you measure your own wealth? How honest are you with your own self assessment? What connections could you embrace by either recognizing a personal need or by sharing a personal ability? Like the advertising slogan goes, you might discover that you are richer than you think.